I remember her telling her father that it was important for me to be with her now.
She sang about love like she'd lived it 1,000 times. But behind the mic, behind the rehearsals, behind the perfect choreography, was a silence even her closest fans never noticed. Janet Jackson wasn't just America's sweetheart. She was a symbol of grace, privacy, and mystery. But what if the silence was never elegance, and more of a wound she couldn't show? Because behind every dazzling costume, behind every sold-out show, behind that quiet smile she mastered too well, were 7 names, 7 women, 7 secrets, 7 stories that were buried so deep, some were never even spoken aloud. They weren't all lovers, they weren't all enemies, but each of them changed Janet in a way the world never saw. And while the headlines chased her famous last name, and the tabloids begged for scandals that never came, the real story was quieter, softer, and far more heartbreaking. These weren't explosive affairs. They were the slow kind of love, the invisible betrayals, the private promises that were never kept. Janet never said their names out loud, but if you've paid close attention, if you've read between the lines of her interviews, her lyrics, her disappearances, the puzzle pieces were always there. This isn't about gossip. This is about a woman who gave the world everything, except the 7 pieces of her heart she could never talk about. And once you hear their names, once you hear the roles they played in her life, you'll understand why silence wasn't just her choice. It was her only way to survive. But we're not starting with the most shocking one. We're starting with the one who walked away first and never looked back. Before Janet ever had a chart-topping single, before she even had her own voice in the industry, there was someone who shaped her from the inside out, and the world never heard her name. She wasn't a celebrity. She wasn't in the spotlight. She was someone Janet trusted when her world was still small, private, and untouched by fame. They met when Janet was just breaking into adulthood, still living in the shadow of her brothers, still figuring out who she was outside the Jackson name. This woman? She was older, confident, the kind of person who walked into a room and made you forget your own name. And for Janet, that confidence was magnetic. They weren't public. They couldn't be. Not in the era she came up in. Not with the family name she carried. Not when the world wasn't ready to hear about 2 women behind closed doors. So Janet kept her quiet, protected her, respected the silence. But silence has a cost, because while Janet was learning what it meant to love someone privately, she didn't realize that privacy can feel like shame when it's one-sided. And after just a few years of shadowed moments and hidden love, the woman who once felt like home was gone. No fight, no scandal, just distance, a vanishing. Janet never spoke about her again, not in interviews, not in songs, not even in whispered metaphors buried in her albums. But insiders said that after she left, Janet didn't speak to anyone for days. She just closed off. Some say that was the moment she decided her heart was off limits. That love for her would always come with conditions. And maybe that's why. The next woman who entered her life wasn't someone she could keep hidden at all. She came into Janet's life when Janet was crumbling, just quietly enough for nobody to notice. After the quiet heartbreak of her first hidden relationship, Janet didn't want connection. She wanted control. But then came this woman, a calm in Janet's storm. Not romantic, not loud, just present. She was a bodyguard, assigned after one of Janet's early tours got too chaotic. But to Janet, she became something more. She didn't ask questions. She didn't talk to the press. She didn't care about fame. She watched, she listened, she protected, not just physically, but emotionally. At parties, she stood close, not because she had to, but because she knew when Janet was pretending to be okay. At interviews, she'd signal Janet with the slightest look if something was off. They developed their own silent language, a connection so strong it felt like telepathy. Some said they were inseparable. Others whispered it was deeper than that, but no one could ever prove it, and neither of them ever confirmed it. Until one day, she just wasn't there. No announcement, no goodbye, no quiet exit, just gone. Security was reassigned. Her team was told it was time for a change. Janet said nothing. But a few months later, fans noticed something strange. In a rare backstage video, Janet's assistant was overheard saying, "She still cries about her." No one knew who her was, but it wasn't a name anyone recognized. And Janet? She never filled that space again. Not with another bodyguard, not with another confidant. She built walls higher, tighter, sharper. But here's the thing. The world assumed Janet was keeping people out. But what if she was just trying to keep one person in? And while everyone thought she'd buried that chapter, the woman who came next wasn't someone Janet could forget, because their flame, it almost destroyed everything. It started as a whisper, but it didn't stay one for long. A small entertainment blog dropped a headline that barely got attention. Janet Jackson's mysterious travel companion speaks out. Most people ignored it, until they read what the woman actually said. In the interview, just a few casual lines, she didn't name names, but she said this: "I was close with someone legendary. She taught me how to love in silence." That was all it took. The internet exploded. Fans pulled photos, matched timelines, found flight records. Clips of Janet laughing off questions about her dating life suddenly felt different. And for Janet, it was like being stripped bare in front of the world. She didn't respond publicly. She never does. But her team, they went into overdrive. They wiped photos, changed the stylist credits, denied everything. People were let go. Phones stopped ringing. And the woman? She vanished almost as quickly as she arrived. But the damage was done. Not because the story was confirmed, but because, for the first time in years, Janet looked hurt. The smile faded. The interviews grew colder. She tightened the circle again. Fewer friends, less trust. Every connection now came with a question. Would they sell me out too? And while the world moved on, thinking it was just a rumor, Janet never forgot it. Because this wasn't just betrayal, it was a warning. Even love could be weaponized against her. But the most painful fallout wasn't from the press. It came from her own family. For most people, family is a safe place. For Janet, it was complicated. After the leak, her world didn't just shift publicly, it cracked privately. Because behind the scenes, her family wasn't silent. One call stood out. It wasn't harsh, it was quiet. A soft voice from one of her brothers. "You know Dad wouldn't have liked this." That's all he said. But Janet knew exactly what he meant. The Jackson name carried weight, not just in music, but in expectation. And when you're born into legacy, you don't just represent yourself. You represent them. Suddenly, everything she did, every move, every friendship, felt like a threat to the brand. Her choices were being measured, not by how they made her feel, but by how they might look. And the worst part? No one asked her how she was holding up. No one asked if she was happy. They just wanted the headlines to stop. So Janet shut down. She canceled appearances, pushed album work aside, stopped answering certain calls. Because how do you explain to your family that the person who made you feel most alive is now the person you're being asked to forget? This wasn't about career anymore. It was about control. And deep down, Janet knew something was breaking, not in public, in her. But just when things seemed to settle into silence again, a second betrayal hit, and this time, it was from someone even closer. She thought her inner circle was locked down. Only a handful of people were allowed behind the curtain. Her assistant, a longtime friend, one cousin she trusted with everything. But even in that small circle, someone talked. It started with a tiny leak. A tabloid reported that Janet had been emotionally unstable after a private breakup. No name, no source, no proof. But the phrasing, it was too specific. Only someone inside would know what she'd said behind closed doors. Only someone close would have known she wasn't sleeping, wasn't eating, wasn't okay. So she did what she had to do. Janet launched a quiet investigation. One by one, she tested her circle. Subtle changes, fake stories, whispers passed along, until one came back to her, word for word in a gossip blog based in London. And the only person she'd told that version to was the cousin, a cousin who had grown up in her shadow, who never quite found her own spotlight, who always smiled but never quite meant it. That betrayal cut deeper than the last, because this time it wasn't about a relationship. It was about trust, family, blood. Janet didn't confront her. She didn't need to. She simply disappeared, changed her number, moved locations, tighter circle, even fewer faces. And the message was clear. If you can't be trusted, you don't belong. But even as she built new walls around her life, one scandal would punch through them. And this time, it had nothing to do with love. Just when Janet thought she'd weathered the worst, a file landed on her attorney's desk. No return address, no fingerprints, just a flash drive in an unmarked envelope. Inside, private photos, messages, a journal entry, real or forged, no one could tell. But it read like a confession, not of a crime, of a relationship. And whoever sent it made their demand crystal clear: pay up or watch it all go public. Janet's team went into emergency mode, not because the information was confirmed, but because it looked real enough to destroy her. The threat wasn't just about exposure. It was about rewriting her story on someone else's terms. Lawyers got involved. Tech experts traced the metadata, but the trail was clean, professional. Whoever did this knew exactly what they were doing. And while the public never heard a word, Janet was living in a private panic. Every news notification felt like a bomb. Every photo from the past became a potential weapon. And the worst part? She didn't know who to blame. A jilted lover? A former employee? Someone inside her own family? No one was above suspicion anymore. In her world, paranoia became survival. And while her team worked to silence the threat, Janet made a choice that shocked even her closest confidants. She decided to walk away. But where she went next was the last place anyone expected. One morning, she was just gone. No press release, no social post, no goodbye tour, or tearful speech on daytime TV. Janet simply vanished from the spotlight. Tabloids speculated everything from secret rehab to international relocation. Some said she was spotted in Italy. Others swore she was living under a new name in the Caribbean. The truth? No one really knows. Her team stopped responding to media inquiries. Her publicist took on new clients, and her official website barely updated. But if you looked closely, real closely, you could find traces. A donation made in her name to a women's shelter in Atlanta. A voice, familiar, soft, on a meditation app no one promoted. It wasn't fame she was chasing anymore. It was peace, because sometimes disappearing isn't running away. It's reclaiming what was stolen, her voice, her boundaries, her life. And while the world waits for a comeback, maybe that's not the point. Maybe the real power move was walking away on her own terms. No stage, no lights, just silence. A silence she finally controlled. But here's the thing. Every story has an ending, but not every ending is meant to be understood. And in Janet's case, maybe the real story is the one she never told.